Here, in the perpetual youth of nature, we return to reason, and we find cheap crafting materials. Pine bark has proven itself to work really well for terrain and bases. But what if you can't find it? Perhaps we can use just wood instead. Here we have some exquisite pieces of dead wood lying around, so don't you dare make any excuses for not making terrain. Okay, I'm back at the table with the wood dried and somewhat sterilized in the oven. The idea is to use this as high quality flocking that can be used to cover ground with stones and rubble. Here I am chopping up the wood with my professional crafting knife. As long as you use slightly decayed wood, it should be easy to chop up. If you for some reason are hopelessly unable to even find old wood sticks, your poor foraging skills might find some fresh wood. This is easier to whittle into strips first, then chop it up. There. What's that? Compared to the bark, the wood should do. Of course, the bark is much easier to chop up. The cutting noises are better and you can shape large pieces as cliffs and rocks. The old wood, on the other hand, is easily available. Even you might find some. Let's see how it works then. Next I made the bases for my creations. I got inspired to make spell effect markers that are suitable for D&D spells or used as legendary actions for unique monsters. The bases can also be made from cardboard. In that case, you want to cover up the ends and watch out for warping, as I did with the fairy portal diorama, probably one of my favorites so far. Next I covered the surfaces with plenty of PVA glue. Good. Then I dropped on my chopped up wood flocking. Try to cover everything with a blend of small and large bits, and make sure that there's not too much sticking outside the edges. As comparison, I covered up one base with my chopped up bark flocking. I think the results should be good for both flock types, but we'll see. Then I sprayed on diluted PVA glue I put in a spray bottle. I soaked the flock as I knew I had time to wait. The next day they were fully dried. Everything seems to stay in place. I'll start with the big one. This one will get nasty spikes. First, I carved this spiky pillar from a dry but not rotten stick. Good enough. I then carved in some damage with the blade, and then sawed it into suitable length. There we have it. Next, additional spikes. I will make these from leftover spruce. I carved these pointy as well. I made sure I got many good edges for later highlighting, as I did with the claws of my gold dragon, made from oat packages. I also added cuts into these spikes. I took my PVA glue and attached the big stick first. Making sure the white glue is not visible, I applied more of the wood flocking. And then the spruce spikes. These were easily glued on as following. Apply dabs of glue first, then drop on your flocking, and poke in the spikes. In this way, the spikes will stay upright while the glue dries. Make sure to gently push down the flock as well. That's good. I wanted space for miniatures, so I didn't add more spikes than this. I lied. One more. Next I moved over to the flaming skull thingy. The skull shall be attached to something like this, cut out from cardstock. A bit tricky to cut out, but I managed. There. I cut here so I could get the skull in place. Beautiful. I glued this onto the base in the same way as I glued on the spikes. Now it is time to make the flames. To make these, I cut out a few somewhat flame-shaped cardstock bits. About 3 should do. With the help of some hot glue, the pieces were easily put together, like this. While the glue was hot, I could adjust the shape of the flames. I then reinforced the tips of the cardstock by applying PVA glue with my fingers. Thin cardstock bits are fragile, but no more. I also did the same thing here. While this piece waits, I'll do something less sinister for the next base. I cut out crosses from this sheet of plastic. It would be better to use something thicker, or for the sake of ease you could use cardstock. I cut out a total of 3 crosses. I will glue them on like this, but not yet. Forest admiration break. I found these pine acorns. They will surely be useful for something. I don't know what I will use them for, but I'm sure I'll figure out something. So I did. For this base I'll use a pine cone. They are not actually called acorns. This will be some sort of a healing fountain. I just painted it yellow to begin with. I think it's time to get an airbrush soon. I regretted. Instead, I only painted the edges yellow. That's better, and a bit on the tips as well. Then I followed up with some white highlights and strong tone wash on the inner surfaces, to make the yellow appear brighter. I then took all bases for base coating. The skull will not be sprayed, so I removed it. I covered these with a black primer. Then I continued by overbrushing each piece with brown. Here in the fire skull base I did not paint in the middle. That will be the most scorched area. Same thing for the spike base. I did not paint on the mounds where the spikes stick out. When painting over black you might need more or brighter paint than you think. The brown here darkens when it dries over the black base coat. For variants, I fully covered some stones brown and others grey. There, that leads us to a grey dry brush. These brushing noises will surely improve the quality of the video. This is now quite dark and cold in color, so I dry brushed with a light brown. I can now see a clear difference between bark and wood flocking. The chopped wood is much sharper and has more paintable edges. Perhaps because my wood bits were larger and longer compared to the previously chopped up bark. I will now finish these individually, starting with the spikes. I painted the edges of the larger spike with green. After a few layers it was good, and I painted the rest as well. I couldn't paint exactly on the edges, but they turned out great anyway. Here I dry brushed the ground around the spikes with green and then with yellow. When doing this, I brushed outwards from the spikes. Basically, this is peasant level object source lighting, and then naturally I highlighted the edges with the yellow as well. You can't really go wrong with these colors, and it keeps the burglars out. If you're enjoying the content, make sure to subscribe and like this video in the end. Good, this is the one I'm most excited about. I had already base painted the flame here white. I started by dry brushing this chaos wheel with metallic paint, trying to keep it quite dark. Then I painted the edges with silver. I already started with the peasant level object source lighting, so why stop now? I used a weird brush to gently tap in some orange. I applied it wherever I imagined the fire to shine. Then I did similarly with yellow. Not bad, not good. Then I took the flame and painted it yellow, leaving the hottest parts white. Then I worked my way through with oranges, red and dark red. Good enough, it's only cardstock after all. I dry brushed more yellow in the direction of the flame, then figured out how to assemble this. First I placed the head. Then I placed a bark bit under, along with some PVA glue, and managed to balance the flame skull in the nose of the skull. Later I moved it in the mouth. Now let's retake Jerusalem with silver crosses. First I fully painted these with gunmetal. after which I dry brushed the edges with silver. Then I used diluted blue to paint a smaller and vague cross in the middle. Something like this. I painted with blue next, quite shaky, and I failed a few times before filming. And I painted the middle of the cross white. Done. Turned out quite nice, even though I can't paint cleanly. I had an idea how to attach the crosses. First, I applied plenty of glue where the crosses shall be placed. Okay, that will never work. I just applied the flocking first. By the way, this is dill. I waited for a while and tried to poke in the crosses, hoping that the glue would be thick enough. Nope. I prayed for an answer. I got none, but tried again. The glue was now blessed by stickiness as it had dried further. I was able to get the crosses in place quite easily. While I had the herbs ready, I also applied glue to this base, then placed in the pine cone and dropped in some thyme, followed by a sprinkling of dill. I let this dry completely, then lightly brushed some areas of the flocking with yellow. Conjure vicious spikes to impale your players, or use this as a perhaps not so suitable marker for the spell Spike Growth from D&D 5th edition. Perhaps wounded travelers can recover at peculiar wells of healing. This one can be used as a raid boss's legendary action, or why not as a fire skull miniature that constantly shoots fire. Yeah, why not? As brilliant green did the grass sprout, as the paladin summoned a field of radiance to vanquish the undead. Learn more simple things by subscribing to Bard's Craft. Like the video and I'll show you how to craft more terrain and miniatures. And thanks to my patrons, the support increases my chance of survival. If you get value out of these videos, consider supporting the channel on Patreon, or get stuff from my website.